My childhood friend keeps deleting texts between us and now her boyfriend thinks I'm trying to steal his girl. I have a childhood friend, Emily, that I've known since we were 5. We originally met when our fathers both moved from Germany to the UK. We became friends and we were basically raised as siblings. It's accurate to say I treat her like I do my other sisters. People struggle at times to believe nothing has happened between us, but is it so insane for someone with 3 sisters to treat a childhood friend as a 4th? We stopped being friends briefly when she got married really young to her boss. He ended up being incredibly abusive and controlling her life in every aspect. After 3 years, she divorced him and we reconciled. Around this time I attended university and met my now wife early on. We've been together for 17 years now, and she's become really close to Emily over the years. Also, while at university, I met a guy named George in my course. We were part of the same friend group, but didn't stay in touch until we ended up working together a good 10 years after graduation. I ended up introducing him to Emily and they started a relationship. A year or so later they moved in together. On the surface, he seemingly was fine with me and Emily's friendship and never said anything. Over the past few weeks, I started getting texts from her that were just off. I was suspicious when she used a common British shortening of my full name rather than the traditional German version our fathers would always use. When some overly flirty messages occurred, I immediately shut it down because I knew it wasn't her. I called him out and asked if this was George using her phone and bluntly asked what in the world he was doing. He never responded, but after explaining the situation to my wife, she went over to Emily's with my phone to see what was going on. I wasn't there for this, but she showed Emily our entire text history and what he had done. George came home and they confronted him. He first outright denied it and had the audacity to accuse Emily of cheating. Emily just left with my wife to come stay with us after this because there wasn't any reasoning with him. The morning after he called and begged her to come home, he was crying and threw himself at her feet. He highlighted that she has a habit of deleting our conversations, which drove him mad. Emily doesn't just do this with our conversations, but with everyone. He was always jealous of our relationship. He found it hard to see me with her and it got to him when she would say stuff like how she loved me. Not being able to read our texts drove him to go detective mode to see what our relationship was like. The absurd texts were an attempt to see if we would engage in something together. At this point, Emily asked for me and my wife's opinion on this whole thing. I called BS on this being a mistake. He violated her privacy by going through her phone and risked our friendship by masquerading as her. He risked my marriage by trying to bait me and risked Emily and my wife's friendship by making it look like Emily was sleeping around with me. I didn't outright say she should leave him, but I highlighted how dishonest this whole thing was. She eventually went back home and I didn't hear anything for a few days, but Emily eventually revealed to my wife that she had functionally forgiven him. My wife worked out from the conversation what had happened. He had basically flipped the script on me by playing into fears from her marriage. He described me as another male trying to control her life. He encouraged her to make her own decision, but she had to ignore me because I didn't have her best interest at heart. My wife quietly pointed out he was in fact being like her ex, not me. At this point Emily just gave up and couldn't decide between the man she loves and her brother. She's trying to pretend nothing ever happened. We haven't spoken since. Apparently part of forgetting this ever happened is also giving into his worries about our friendship. Every time I try and bring up what he did, I've been told to stay out of it. I can't reason with her about what he did while he's got her convinced I'm controlling her. I rarely see George at work and he's rightfully stayed the hell away from me. I'm tempted to bring my sisters into this, so maybe they can talk some sense into Emily, but that can be seen as manipulative. Any advice here? Update 1. So, I followed the general advice of just leaving the entire situation alone. I agree any interference from me or my family would be manipulative and controlling, although I mean well. So, I haven't really spoken to Emily since slightly before Christmas, but her mother contacted me a little after New Year to ask if I knew what was going on with her. Emily's cousin back in Germany had contacted her mother saying she had turned up on her doorstep after apparently breaking up with George. According to her mother, Emily went back to our hometown for the holidays. She brought George and at some point they ran into her ex-husband at the pub. Apparently at some point, George approached Emily's ex-husband and asked for some advice. George is familiar with why they divorced and that he was controlling. Somewhat to her ex-husband's credit, he apparently refused to answer any questions and quietly approached Emily's mother to relay what he had asked him. Now this is according to him, and George denies it, but he said George asked him how to handle me in terms of my friendship with Emily. I've no idea what Emily's ex-husband's motivation was here, but they've been divorced for a decade now and he hasn't contacted her in this time, so I'm inclined to believe it wasn't further attempts at interfering with her life. We're all inclined to believe what Emily's ex said despite George denying it, because how else would her ex-husband know he had an issue with me recently? He isn't in contact with anyone who would know about the recent issues. Also, to be honest, the ex never had an issue with me. He saw me as a child and constantly called me kiddo and asked how school was. It would be a very specific shot in the dark on his part to assume George had an issue with me without George saying so himself. So, Her mother told Emily what George had tried to do and pointed out that her boyfriend is now trying to emulate her ex-husband's behavior and encouraged her to confront him over this and also what happened over the last month rather than ignoring it. Nobody was there for the discussion, but he left sometime after it to return to their shared home and she stayed with her mother saying they had broken up. She stayed with her mother until the day after when she, without any warning, left for Germany. The cousin she's staying with assures us she's relatively fine. She's just overwhelmed and embarrassed she let this happen again. She couldn't handle being where she might run into either ex, so staying with her mother was off the table and she just ran somewhere far, but safe. I still haven't spoken to Emily. I've sent her a message with some condolences and reassurance she will always have a home here in the UK. I've decided to continue to give her space while making it clear I am there for her. She hasn't responded, but I assume this is just out of awkwardness over what happened and how George was once my friend. He hasn't spoken to me either, and I haven't seen him at work at all. So yeah, not a happy ending really. It shouldn't have taken her abusive ex getting involved for a resolution, but as people predicted, George was being abusive and he would repeat that behavior. I suppose it was relatively painless that he showed his true colors so emphatically without much further abuse. This could have easily dragged on longer. Thanks for the advice. Me staying out of it didn't make this any easier for her, but it probably avoided making it worse. Update 2. I jumped the gun a little with the previous update and looking back, I hadn't actually spoken to Emily and it was all secondhand information. Given this whole thing has now been entirely sorted in the 3 months since it happened, I thought I'd actually give an actual full resolution. So, Emily came back to the UK just before the country was locked down and moved in with us. We played Divinity 2 whilst we hashed out exactly what went down from her perspective. I apologized for going behind her back and speaking to her mother about it all. Situations like this are never helped by information being relayed through other people, and I asked if she wanted to go through it all from start to finish. Basically, she buried her head in the sand the day she found out he tried those shenanigans with me. It was just too much for her. She couldn't win. Either she lost the man she loved and the lifestyle she had, or she lost her brother. I assured her she'd never lose me, but she revealed she low-key hated the fact she let herself be taken advantage of like this twice and couldn't face me for not listening to my advice. She also mentioned that breaking up with him would inevitably land her on my doorstep for support, and that made her feel even worse. This went deeper and she opened up about her insecurities, how she regretted never going to university and instead married her abusive ex-husband. How she feels like an accessory to other people's happiness. She saw me and my wife, a power couple as she put it, and just felt so small by comparison. She did love George, but leaving him would leave her with functionally nothing again, and she couldn't handle that. We talked about this a lot and I revealed that I'm aware my support of her could be a problem. I felt like I had made their relationship awkward by being so involved in her life. It might have been hard for George to be her boyfriend while I was there paying for her tabs, and acting like a father coddling his child. I asked if my financial support of her tied into this feeling of inadequacy, and she said yes. She felt trapped when the relationship ended because she had no independence or true control. While I would never use my position to control her, she would still be living by someone else's good graces. She felt she needed to stand on her own 2 feet and be independent, that way her decisions would be her own. In the same way a child wants independence from their parents, she feels she finally needs independence from me. We came up with a plan for her to start back up her education. She was capable of attending university, but decided not to because of her marriage. My financial security was really born of an inheritance I had after my father passed. I used to not have to worry about rent during my extended time in education and early career. I've decided to pay it forward and put her in a similar situation by letting her use my flat. Yes, this is me financially supporting her, but in a strictly limited way. No more covering errand expenses, paying for holidays, or footing the bill when we socialize. She will not pay rent, but she will cover all expenses on the flat, and she moves out the moment she finds work. She didn't love the idea of me owning her home, but I called it my last act as that guy in her life. After this, we'll just be independent siblings/best friends. She will be moving soon and will need her room since my wife is now 5 months pregnant. As for George, he swears up and down he never asked the ex-husband to handle me. He claims he asked how to be fine with me. It wasn't seeking advice on how to deal with me. It was seeking advice how to be fine with me the way her ex-husband was. Could be true, who knows, but it's irrelevant ultimately. We recently found out George moved a girl, who was a longtime friend, into the house he and Emily used to share. Emily is fairly certain he never cheated on her, but she laughed when she found out he's romantically living together with a longtime friend 3 months after the breakup. The dude's insecurity was likely born of his own feelings for a friend. He was getting close with a girl he was friends with, so he projected that onto me and Emily.